Hello and welcome to the premiere episode of Art of Science. I'm Graham Ambrose and I'll be your host here on Art of Science, a quarterly interview podcast that coincides with each issue of Policy Studies Journal. Each episode will feature both authors and articles from the new issue. With that, I want to thank the Policy Studies Journal and the Center of Policy Design and Governance at Syracuse University for supporting this joint initiative. Now I'd like to introduce our two guests for our premiere episode, Dr. Mark Lubell and Dr. Francesca Vantaggiato. Mark is a professor of the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at the University of California, Davis, and is a director of the Center of Environmental Policy and Behavior at Davis. Francesca is a lecturer at the Public Policy at King's College London, and was previously a postdoctoral researcher at the Center of Environmental Policy and Behavior. Recently, Mark and Francesca published a paper entitled The Benefits of Specialized Knowledge in Polycentric Governance in PSJ. From here, we have a few questions for both Francesca and Mark, and time permitting, we will select a few questions from the audience as they come up at the end of this episode. So to start off, Francesca, would you mind introducing us to your recent publication?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Graham, and thanks for having us on the first episode of this great idea of a podcast. So you want me to talk about the paper, right?
Yes, just in brief, the main topics and
Okay.
kind of the main points.
Okay. So let's start from unpacking the title, perhaps. The title of the paper is The Benefits of Specialization in Polycentric Governance Systems. And so what we do in that paper is we look at the difference that specialization makes in policy forums that are embedded in a polycentric governance systems. A policy forum is a place where people gather to address a specific policy problem that they are all affected by and interested in addressing, right? But none of them has the capacity of the resources to kind of address it on their own, just to give us some kind of key definitions at the start. And in our case, this is an environmental policy problem. It's the case of adaptation to sea level rise in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a polycentric governance system, meaning that it is a governance system in which there are, so to speak, multiple conversations going on all at the same time, and they're all interconnected and interdependent by the fact of all concerning the same problem and by the fact that a lot of the same people attend these different conversations. And so the third thing I should say is like specialization in this paper means two things, both policy specialization, so knowing a lot about the policy problem, and institutional specialization, which is knowing a lot about the policy system. And so what we did in this paper was we asked, what difference do these two types of specialization make for the policy forum as a whole? Because the literature looks a lot at how specialization benefits the individual actors. So like how do actors who know a lot of things about the policy problems can do better in kind of polycentric systems. And we were interested in like tapping into this idea of like what difference does having highly knowledgeable people in a forum make for the forum as a whole, for like the collective perception of the outputs of the forum.
Definitely. And what do you see as the practical insights of this work? What do you see kind of pushing this work for general practitioners?
Well, what we found there that is kind of the punchline, so to speak, is that higher levels of policy specialization in a forum are associated with more positive perceptions that tangible progress has been made in the forum, even when the forum featured a lot of conflict.
Sure.
So this is there is an interaction in our models that kind of speak to this, which I feel is kind of the key insight. Mark, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. So, I would even state it a little bit more strongly that policy specialization, how well they understand the problem, provides more benefits when there's a conflictual forum where there seems to be a lot of zero-sum games being played. So it's like, that means that policy specialization, having a strong understanding of the problem, is a bit of an antidote to the conflict that can occur in the context of planning in these different types of forums. Interestingly enough, the other variable, institutional specialization, which is basically their knowledge of the governance system, doesn't seem to matter too much in this context. And honestly, this is one of the cases where, this is an initial empirical result that bears further investigation for sure, because part of the inspiration for this paper came from my own direct experience working with these people in the context of regional planning in the Bay Area. And I saw both of these types of specialization in operation, where, you had some people that really understood the problem well, where that was the main thing they focused on. That's kind of the policy specialization idea. And then other people who really understood the system very well, who all the actors were, what all the venues and planning processes were. They showed up to they kept being repeat players. That's more of the idea of like institutional knowledge. And that, I really think that type of institutional knowledge is valuable. So I think there's a bit of a difference between my qualitative understanding of that idea and what we found in the quantitative analysis here. So there's enough of my qualitative knowledge of it is enough to say that, this empirical finding it needs to be replicated and fleshed out in different ways. Because the other practical implication that I've also seen in these polycentric systems that I think is very beneficial is you have people who like only go to one venue, and that's the only one they show up to. And once you describe to them the range of other actors and processes that are happening, that really helps them understand how to navigate the system better and try to find solutions to those problems that they're facing. And so, like, the fact that didn't have like a significant coefficient in this particular analysis doesn't, for me at least, reject that hypothesis. That we completely reject the hypothesis that we started out with there.
Yeah, and kind of discussing this experience that you have with these groups, Mark. I'm curious if you could just talk about how this idea kind of emerged, right? So this notion of both institutional knowledge and policy knowledge, is this something that you kind of have always seen in these groups, or is there kind of like a specific story or reason that it became kind of more important, or like the focus point of this research?
Well, there's a lot of lessons to say there. I would say that, one of the lessons there is that it's been the emergence of these ideas has been a really nice mix of how theory and practice operate together to generate knowledge over time. So, when I started working on the ecology of games framework and this idea of applying that idea to its polycentric governance systems, there was some empirical research and in a particular finding that helped me. I was like, this might be going on. And then I got involved in these processes and started studying them more, and did a lot of qualitative research and participatory research of various sorts. And then I was seeing, these individuals who were specialists of various sorts, and both the institutional knowledge and the problem knowledge. And they were people who were high on both of those levels of knowledge, were really central in the core of the system and were really key actors in the system from a network perspective. And then, another piece of the magic here is that Francesca came to, work with me, and through our discussions and our various experiences and different theoretical perspectives that we were bringing, both in terms of what we had studied before, and then, her coming from more of a European policy process perspective. I think that our two ways of thinking about the system really kind of helped us like zero in together collectively as from a thinking perspective on what, this particular type of research question in this analysis. So that was kind of the two lessons there, the kind of the magic that happens when you try to like bring the theory and the practice together, and also what you can get out of it, a really great collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of, if I may, like the reason why I smile is that I also remember that like the key turning point for this paper was that we had been talking a lot about examining how the composition of policy forums matters for outputs and outcomes, which we felt like was a gap in the literature. And so I was interested in particular in this, like in kind of how do different kind of proportions of people matter for outcomes. And then I remember that you, Mark, went to a talk by someone in the department at Davis who talked about bees. And you told me, I've been to this talk that was about bees and how some bees are generalists, so they like eat from various types of flowers, and some bees are specialists and only eat from the same type of flower, and so kind of which one kind of adapts better to kind of a changing climate. And I remember that from these bees kind of idea and the generalists and specialists, that's how kind of then we narrowed down the focus onto the specialization. So
yes, that is true. Thank you for reminding me of that and having a better memory than me of that discussion, because that is another interesting piece that we brought some the value of interdisciplinary perspectives here is like bringing some ideas that coming from food web research and trophic systems, which use a lot of two-mode network analysis, just like we do, and like using that as an inspiration or even direct conceptual import into our ideas. And something that we didn't really do quite in this paper that they do in that type of research is that it's not just the bees that specialize, but it's also the flowers that specialize. So if the bees are the actors and the forums are the flowers, we also need to think some forums are kind of general purpose and they do everything, and other forums are quite specialized and attract only certain types of actors doing certain types of things. And I would say that we haven't really fleshed that piece of it out yet in any of our research, but that's something that is important to keep doing, especially if you believe, like Francesca and I think both do, that when you look at these polycentric systems, is that they are like a brain. They have differentiated regions that do different functions, and collectively work together to solve or not solve these problems. That kind of functional differentiation and the linkages between the actors and the forums is like, there's a lot of work to be done on that to fully understand how all of that works together.
Yeah.
Certainly. And kind of to dig into this a little bit more, I'm curious. So we've talked a little bit about, Francesca, you're interested in this composition, right? So who's actually coming to these different forums? We had this epiphany that happened at the bee kind of presentation. And I'm curious how it all kind of comes together, right? So there's a great survey that you guys use to actually get this work done in the paper. And I'm curious if the interest in composition drives that survey, or if you had the survey and realized that compositional questions were there. I'm curious where the idea is coming from and how you leveraged the tools at hand to kind of get to this paper eventually.
So we, so the survey followed a round of interviews that Mark did in 2016 and 2017 in the Bay. I joined the research process and UC Davis kind of in 2018. And so, but I did benefit a lot from those transcripts and those kind of audio interviews, because like they really helped understanding how the people who are in the system understand it and what they want to get from it, what they think it can deliver. And so we use that empirical evidence and the theoretical framework of the ecology of games that Mark has been kind of working on ever since 2010s to put the survey together. And so we knew that there were social processes that we were interested in mapping. The three main ones in the ecology of games are learning, cooperation, and bargaining. And then, we had this kind of perceptions of things in the literature that we could contribute to. And so we drafted the survey on that basis. And then I feel like we had, let's say, some broad hypotheses about the social processes that we would observe embedded in the surveys. But then when we got the data, that kind of interaction between the theory and the data, and between us, the kind of, dialogue that we had over the months, eventually helped kind of shape the various papers that have come out of this research.
Yeah, and I would add to that we did have the survey reviewed by stakeholders, some of my key informants in the Delta, in the Bay, because we wanted to make sure that, first of all, people could sensibly answer the survey, and that it also kind of resonated with their experience, and they might find it helpful. So, we did do a report back to those stakeholders, that more of a policy report about some of the more descriptive results from that survey. And they all loved it and circulated it, and we gave presentations on it down in the Bay. So it spoke both to the practitioners and the policy process theory people. As far as I'm concerned, that's what all of our research should be doing. If it's not able to speak to the stakeholders and decision makers that we're studying, then what are we doing? It's just we're operating in a detached theory world, and I just don't find that very compelling. And another thing to say, like Francesca talked about, this kind of dialogue between the theory and the data, and like that eventually gets distilled into this paper. I've found that is something that happens in literally every single project. You kind of have like a kind of a idea of what you're trying to measure and the research questions motivating it from the theory. You design the survey around that, you get the data back, and you find out that the data can't answer one question, can't answer another question. Analyses get more precise around that. And then you think about, all right, well, now that we've got like some answers here, and we've done some kind of back and forth between inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, like what's the next generation of the research? Like, how do we design the surveys or the research design to be more precise, to get at the questions that we haven't answered, or the new questions that may have come up in the context of the research? That's like just a piece of the scientific process that I think we all just have to live with, especially if we're doing policy process research, where there's just, a lot of complexities and endogeneity. It's just like a piece of the whole thing that you really can't escape very, very easily, which is, a feature of complex governance systems.
Certainly. And Mark, you talk about these kind of iterations over time, and research that's speaking to both practitioners and the policy process people. And I'm curious if you could just speak about, obviously this paper is a part of a much larger stream of research, and just talk about how you have, or you think people should set up these research projects that are multi-years, multi-decades, so you can have these iterative research questions and digging in different places, as it's important to the practitioners itself.
Okay, well, I can tell you what the dream should be on this.
Sounds good.
This is a very difficult dream to achieve. So first of all, before I get to the dream part, these polycentric systems, in my opinion, are basically everywhere for every single policy issue. So they don't just apply to sea level rise or environment, but education. We've had people apply the polycentric governance approach to, and the ecology of games approach to the development of talent in the Norwegian handball system, like how people figure out across venues how to find talent and find the best Norwegian handball players for like the Olympics and stuff like that. So this stuff is everywhere, but from a research design perspective, to understand how these systems evolve over time, venues live and die and change, actors come in and out of the system, how decisions are made and may affect the underlying kind of social and ecological processes and problems. I think we need like a huge observatory system that covers, for example, if we're going to talk about coastal management and sea level rise, we need like 100 different estuaries in which we're doing this research. And it's kind of like the LTER system, long-term ecological research observatory system, in which they're trying to bring in some social science now, but we need that for governance. And we need to be able to have like teams of researchers at each of these sites applying some core set of common methodologies that we agree on, and then like really tracing them over long periods of time. Like, the Advocacy Coalition Framework and Paul Sabatier talks about these systems evolving over decades, and I definitely think that is true. But we have these really limited snapshots, at best a couple of of time periods for a couple of places. Some of my previous work with Ramiro Berardo and John Schultz for Jack Meeherder, for example. So we need more of that. Like Francesca may want to talk about, trying to set something up in England. But that sort of thing is like what we need. And it's super hard to do because the money is a lot. And it's like beyond what most of the social behavioral sciences divisions in NSF can deal with. And you got to have it like not just be for 3 years, but like for a much longer time with like renewing things over time. And you got to solve a big research or collective action problem. So if we have, let's say, 100 sites with like some really cool data across those 100 sites, who's going to author all that? Who gets to, how do you divide up the labor, make sure that all the people are cooperating with each other, doing the common research protocols that are required, and like carving out different, intellectual ownership of the different products there.
Francesca, do you have any comments? I know Mark alluded to a similar network.
Yeah, I agree. These systems need to be observed over time, and I would also add they would need to be observed. I mean, it was kind of implicit in what Mark said, from different angles, right? You really need to bring together the various methodologies. I feel like the qualitative component, when you're trying to understand a system, is absolutely pivotal. However, explaining how it operates, how it actually works, and how that work informs the more formal policy process is something that will require some kind of quantitative analysis to scale it up, right? And then there's a lot of knots that you have to untangle when you study policy systems, right? How big is this system? Who really counts? How do you measure that? How do you conceptualize and operationalize inputs and outputs? Like all of these things are part of this and do require some kind of hard thinking on them. Mark is right that like on the basis of the work that I did with him here, I am starting a research program on something related but slightly different, which is flood risk management in England.
Sure.
And how it is a polycentric system, and it is right now I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Political Economy, and flood risk management is a political economic issue, because the decisions that you make for climate adaptation, because this is what we're really about here, right, will create kind of winners and losers. This is the same in the Bay Area, it's the same in England, and it's the same everywhere. How the policymaker will decide which money to spend where, the priority list that will be drafted of the projects to kind of address first and which to address last, create imbalances in kind of, create essentially winners and losers. And all of these issues are the political economy of climate adaptation, and they are part of the governance system that exists before and alongside the policy process. And this is kind of, we are fascinated by these topics. And so we kind of, that's the research that we do.
Yeah, this is wonderful. And I would like to just kind of shift the question just slightly. I think it's been fascinating to hear kind of setting up systems and inclusion in like an academic sense of getting multiple stakeholders involved, multiple stakeholders taking multiple methodologies to look at these systems. But I think after reading your paper, the other interesting thing is you had 3,000 people that actually send the surveys to, and you had 700 people that actually responded. So my other question would be, shifting a little bit, is how do you get the inclusion or participation of stakeholders? Might they be individuals in these forums, or the governments that are ultimately kind of spending the money, or in the political economy sense, as you're discussing, Francesca?
My perspective, like my perception from the experience of working in the Bay Area, was that we just made it known that we were doing this research. We kind of went to policy meetings, tried to talk to people, that were involved in the policy systems, and went to a wide variety of meetings. We went to, local ones, regional ones, environmentally focused, policy focused. And so we tried to make it known that we were doing this research, and we tried to explain why. So we tried to explain kind of the added value for those who were involved in the system. And then we filled in our survey. And we did get, I feel like, a good amount of respondents, because like the 3,000 email addresses were like from a subset of organization that was like 600 organization. And I think 350 of those kind of actually filled in the survey. And then we had this other pretty big amount of organizations that, and here we come to kind of the challenges of doing this kind of research, right? We had a lot of responses from, let's say, smaller organizations that were not included in our initial very vast list of contacts. And so we tried to reach out to those to kind of, get them to fill the survey and respond to our questions. And in the end, we ended up with a sample that is representative, but we wish we could have had more time to do a more proper kind of snowball thing. Mark, what do you think?
I mean, the benefits of policy engagement, the research benefits of policy engagement, which, I had done a bunch of work on the qualitative side before that. So I had got to know a lot of the core people and participated already in some of the venues. And then, as we were rolling out the more quantitative part, we built upon that and made sure that they knew it was going on. And as I was saying before, had it reviewed by some key people so that they would see the benefits of it. And then they helped us advertise it and things like that. Helped us like identify lists and give us spreadsheets in some cases. But that said, we did take a very kind of, shotgun approach in the sense that we combined everything from all these different lists. Even if we weren't completely certain that they were involved with sea level rise. And because of that, it's what is our true response rate? It's a little bit fuzzy what it might be, because, we did probably, the survey was reaching some people who had maybe read about sea level rise one time and signed up because they were just kind of interested, never really participated, but they wouldn't answer the survey. Even if they did, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. So, you got to, like, out of those 3,000 people, some percentage of them at the periphery don't really count, but it's hard to quantify that. So
sure.
Our response rate of actual people that matter as far as sea level rise governance is probably better than what we could, report from a objective quantitative perspective. But as Francesca was alluding to, like, when you're doing survey research in these complex governance systems, like, figuring out who's involved and getting those lists, it's not like there's like a phone book or something for them, right?
Yeah.
You have to like assemble it from multiple things and do the awareness building and and show that you can, hopefully the work that you do has some benefit to those stakeholders. Otherwise, why should they waste their 20 minutes of time filling out the survey?
Definitely. And kind of, so taking a step back and thinking about not only engagement for this project, but engagement for kind of the whole research stream itself. I'm curious if you have any advice for young scholars that are trying to build a program like this, trying to start a research initiative or kind of a network as you're trying to, Francesca. How might you go about it? Or what did you try and what didn't work as well?
I would say that there is an investment of time that needs to be made up front into literally getting to know the system, which does mean, reading the policy reports, going to the meetings, talking to the people, explain to them why you're doing the research, what you hope to achieve, and like hearing back from them on like what they think they could get from a research such as yours. The aspect of, and this is not just about the policy impact, although that's absolutely pivotal, but it's also about, by having this conversation, to kind of understand how to set up your research program. like I've spent the last 2 years building the kind of the necessary premises for starting the flood risk management projects that I have started in the UK, and I'm starting to kind of reap the benefits now.
Sure.
So there is that kind of upfront investment, which is necessary and pivotal, because this is, for the most part, I mean, you can do causal inference in some ways when you study policy process, but this is for now observational research. And so you're kind of, to get an understanding of like the directionality of the correlation of the variables and what that might mean and what you need to take into account, you do need to know what the system is about. And so that's just that's just what it is. And so that's one. And the other thing I would say is that I would like to see more, and I would like to see, and I am trying to write more research that brings together cases from like very different political systems, of like similar processes that kind of, polycentric, multi-level, fragmented governance, lots of players wanting different things and kind of furthering different agendas, who move within different types of constraints and opportunities. And like that kind of comparative work is really what I think we should be aiming for.
And can I ask the other side of that question of, did you ever try anything that, like, looking back, like, oh gosh, that just really did not work?
Yeah, I have.
All the time.
Sure.
Yes, I do have several shelved ideas and projects, but you know what? Even those help you produce the better research that eventually kind of gets published. Like even understanding which then, work, it kind of is a bit of a broad concept. Like there are ideas that you have that are actually valid, but you don't have the data to actually answer.
Sure.
And so those are things that you maybe will explore kind of next in another kind of point of the research or in another context. There are things that don't work because they just don't apply to the system that you're studying, and that in a sense benefits your current research by knowing kind of what you're actually what you should actually be talking about and looking for. But yeah.
Mark, do you have any ideas or thoughts on?
I mean, I think as scientists, you got to be comfortable with failure at some level of research ideas. I mean, when you look at the survey research, for example, one of the truisms that I tell everybody that I work with, all my students and collaborators, is that there's two things that are for sure true about every single survey that you do. One is, why did I ask that question? So it's a question that completely fails. You think it does something, you look at the results and you're like, WTF? Well, I have no idea what I just did with that question. I thought it did something, but the way people answered it is just completely off base, especially in policy process research, where we don't have like a bunch of standardized questions, like we don't have a lot of kind of like psychometric questions to measure authoritarian personality that we use all the time. Like, how do we measure foreign performance? Well, Mark and Francesca and some others have tried it, and there's a lot of heterogeneity there. We're going to try this out, but we don't have haven't got a lot of standardization there. And then the other thing that is the other truism is like, why didn't I ask that question? So you find you do the analysis and you figure out the question is a complete failure, and then you're like, well, wouldn't it be nice if I had asked that question, because like now I've learned something about this, and but I have no data at all. And then that, between getting rid of the bad questions and adding the good questions, you kind of evolve the instruments going forward, at least. I would like to say a little bit more about this policy engagement piece, because you kind of talked about it from an early career researcher perspective. And that's difficult because as Francesca is saying, it takes a lot of time to develop the relationships and understanding of a particular system. And for an academic's early career researcher who wants to be a professor, for example, they often will do their dissertation in one place and then they're off to another place, and they kind of lose lose that relationships that they may have built. So it's kind of harder to do. So I do think there's kind of a role there for the more senior faculty member who might be a mentor for those students to be like, you have kind of a research site and set of relationships set up, and helping the early career researcher piggyback on some of those relationships and carve out a piece of research that's related to that context that you can call a dissertation, but still, benefits from the social capital and understanding the system that's been developed by somebody who's been in there longer. And then when you go to the next place, work on developing that in your backyard, close by to where the university is a beneficial thing, because like that is like a less costly way of doing things. It's harder. People do it, but it's harder to say, travel a long ways. And some people have established field stations like ecologists in different countries and things like that. So some people do it, but it's harder than kind of thinking, in my case, I'm lucky from a research perspective. The California Bay Delta has basically everything when it comes to governance challenges. So you can study almost everything you want there. But, I think most places have some aspect of that going on. So it takes a while. And that's also a reason, like if you were going to do like these big comparative study designs, that you want to have like kind of local teams in each place. And you got to deal with that, because you need you need to have those local experts in each place to bring that qualitative understanding and the relationships that are needed to do the policy engaged research. You need them. You can't just parachute in on all of these places. And it's an ethical thing too. Like this is another challenge for early career researchers. You work with stakeholders and you do a cool piece of research, and then you're off to the next job somewhere. Like, how do you give back to those stakeholders? And that give back, the value of that really increases over time and through the duration of the relationship. So you're more at risk of being kind of like a parachute researcher at an early career stage, and you want to avoid that as much as possible.
I guess to kind of dig into this notion that you bring up of the parachute researcher, how do you see, or what advice would you give for an early career academic, right? So let's say, as you explained, someone finishes their dissertation and now they're moving on to their first job. What do you think is the most important kind of like aspects or actions of actually going out, building those relationships, and making sure you're not a parachute researcher? Are there any kind of tips you would give, Mark or Francesca?
You got to field that one, Francesca, because you're kind of doing it right now.
It's like I said, I feel it's like really, being present in the context that you want to study. You mentioned, we didn't kind of speak a lot about this, but we did do a ton of network analysis for this data in this project, although not in this particular paper that our discussion stems from. But we did do a lot of network analysis, and that's because there is a relational aspect to governance that is important, and that affects the way in which people make decisions as to which relationships to build and what they want to achieve through them. And being, in a sense, when you start out studying a system, you want to leverage a little bit of that logic. So you want to be into a system as a member that contributes something besides getting something. So I feel like in a lot of, and I feel like this is truer perhaps even at the more local level. Like when you work with local governments, like at a kind of a smaller scale of governance, they're like, people really want to, they really don't like this concept of the parachuting. And so they kind of want you to establish, in a sense, your own credibility and your own, the fact that you care about the things that you're studying. And I'm guessing this is perhaps because they are so close to the policy system that will affect them, in a sense. And so, That's what I would say. Read the reports, go to the meetings, engage with all, or as much as possible with all of the voices that exist in the system.
Yeah, and there's some things I think, like for graduate education and really the culture of academia, that we need to work on around that. Around graduate education, I think like all policy researchers need to kind of become aware of some of these ideas about the ethics of research and what extractive research is. And a lot of that is in literature on environmental justice, kind of like working with tribes and things like that. And, even if you're not doing that sort of work specifically, like I think, those are concepts that people should become aware of within their graduate programs. And then on the culture of academia, it's like, how do you make sure that those sorts of activities are valued, and the time that you spent on them is not like considered wasted time? Because, it's you're not, all that stuff that Francesca was talking about is needed and has a longer term payoff, but it's not like, giving you the next publication right away, which is something that early career researchers often have to value. So there's kind of a conflict there that needs some cultural change. And so like when we evaluate, for example, a publication or a grant, can we look at those, do the review from that angle and say, hey, is this a researcher that's doing a project that really is kind of has some reciprocity and policy engagement built into it? And if they don't do that in an authentic manner, maybe we don't accept the paper, or we don't recommend the money to be funded, because that can help like incentivize doing the policy engagement in as an ethical and productive way as possible.
Certainly.
And I feel like just one last thing that came to mind. I also feel like stakeholders, so to speak, like people who are involved in policy processes or governance processes, really want the social science to kind of happen. I remember, like in the Bay Area, when we, in one of the many presentations of the report on sea level rise, I remember this county government employee, like person, telling us, I'm really glad you wrote this report, because now I have a name for the challenges that I experience, like every day doing this thing. Right? Addressing sea level rise isn't about, we don't know how to build things, or we don't know that whether it's happening or not. At least you don't have that problem kind of in California. But it is really about all of these governance challenges that we were trying to map out. And I find the same thing in my work in England right now. Like people really want for someone to give a name to the challenges that they experience, and to kind of come up with some workable solutions that work in their context.
Yeah,
No, go on, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I was just gonna say, even if you don't have like the solutions, it's like the sort of research we do. We're almost like therapists, right? We go in there and we show them that what they're experiencing is real, and that it's not like a figment of their imagination, and give them a different way of thinking about things. And even if we don't like come up with the solution, that I've seen lots of people like, they look at just the descriptive network diagram, and in a conference, people are, oh, that's just a spaghetti diagram. It doesn't mean anything. But a practitioner is like, oh, I never even thought of it this way, and like feel better about it. And they think that it enables their imagination to think about how they would pursue these problems in a different way. And that kind of therapy value of the research back to the practitioners is, it's a real thing. It's obviously we want to go further than that, but that alone kind of gets you in the door sometimes.
Certainly. And wonderful thoughts. Just to change pace a little bit. So looking back, right, is there any advice that you would give a younger version of yourself after the experience that you've kind of created in academia?
In academia?
In academia or research, yeah. Any advice you'd give a younger version of yourself?
I'm gonna talk about the research process in and of itself, as it happens during your PhD and during your postdoc. Like the reason why, we agreed to this is that I think this is the idea of this podcast is really great because nobody talks to you about the reality of making the research happen. Not very much, right? People focus a lot on kind of the final product, like the publication, the insight, and that's all great and really important. But I do think you are filling a gap here. And so in that perspective and from that angle, what I would say is that producing research, especially good research, is hard. Producing knowledge is hard. And so I think we all should give a lot of respect to people who produce knowledge, including ourselves. And this is the kind of the advice that I would give to my younger self, and to all kind of, PhD postdocs. There is a moment in which you really beat yourself up because you don't think you're making enough progress with the research. And so I would encourage people to really see the progress that they are making by working on the research every day, by kind of, by moving forward the research even a tiny little bit every day is progress, even if you don't see like a concrete, tangible product of it every day. Writing, the additional line of code, writing the additional node, thinking about the project is research, it is work, and it is you kind of making progress. Because like I myself and many others that I've met always enter this phase of like, I'm not good at this, I'm not making any progress, etc. And that's just not true. You just need to learn to see the progress that you're making in the incremental way in which research inevitably works. And like, of course, I say this, it's easier to see it when you have counterparts that you talk to that help you see these things. Like, in my case, it was Mark and the other people in the Center for Environmental Policy and Behavior at Davis. It was the other postdocs that I worked with, etc. And so I would say, find yourself a person that helps you see the progress that you're making every day so that you don't kind of beat yourself up unnecessarily.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the most important things that I think you could tell any young career, early career researcher. That is by far the most frequent conversation I have with early career researchers and graduate students, like that exact point. I often say it in terms of, you don't have to solve the problem right now. You just have to know what to do next. What's the next thing? What's the next incremental thing? As long as we have a meeting and you know what to do next, something to try next to move the ball even just a little bit, maybe one line of code, maybe more, we're going to get there. Small steps will get us there. We don't got to like go there at the end. And I've often found that people get really hung up on the end. It's like they have the vision, they want to be done, they want to make a contribution and and like that paralyzes them at the now, because that's like they can't see it. They think they're never going to get there. Forget about that. Go one step at a time and you will get there. It's just a matter of keeping going. You begin to worry really if you're stuck, like you can't think what's next. And then you got to reach out for some help and bang your head and, maybe go for a hike or whatever it's going to be. And you can solve that problem, but it's way easier to solve the what's next question than it is like the end of the day question. The other thing I would say to tell the early career researchers is to be as nice as possible to everybody around you. Because we get trained in academia to be critical and, tear people down and stuff like that. And I found in our group that, we kind of adopt more of an Ostrom workshop approach with Wayne and Tyler and key people like Francesca and everybody. We have a culture of cooperation and being nice to each other. And that's why we succeed. So I think everybody should do that. And then I think, collectively that, the whole community will be way better off than just like walking in rooms with the intention to throw grenades at each other's research because you've got some critical thing or, the model isn't specified exactly how it should be. It's like, that's to me kind of counterproductive most often.
Wonderful.
Be kind to yourself, in a word, is to your research self. At least,
yes,
and to all of yourself for the purposes of this chat. Be kind to your research.
So as we round out the hour here, I'm curious if Francesca or Mark, any concluding thoughts, any kind of last comments that you'd either want to give a younger self or young researchers in general?
Spend time reading, even beyond your narrow research question. It's great to have a research question that's well specified. It's necessary. It's paramount. And once you have that, start reading more broadly, because that really helps your creativity. It helps you conceptualize things in a kind of more nuanced, better way. I find that really helps. Like Mark was saying, don't think that being a good researcher means necessarily being better than some kind of, ideal that you have in your mind that doesn't exist in practice. Like knowledge production, the academic literature is a conversation that happens diachronically, right? It happens at a kind of staggered time. And you are making a contribution to a conversation that exists. So it's kind of built upon. And finally, my third thought is, I don't know, Mark, do you have a third thought?
You know me, I always have more than three, but the practice saying no, because like that another thing I see with early career researchers is that they like want to say yes to everything. They want to like expand their networks, which is good, but it's also this thing where it's like the new idea is like the exciting idea and the easy part. We should do this. That's exciting. But then you like fragment your time like crazy, and you don't have the time to suffer through the completion of a research project. And there are times when you have to suffer to get the research done, because it's like, there's some like menial task of cleaning up data or whatever it might be that everybody's got to learn to do and get through it. And you got to like get through that hard part. You can't just say no or say yes to all the new exciting things. You got to like keep your focus. And another part of that, I think, is also you got to have work-life balance. I mean, if your mentor or something's like expecting you to work 80 hours a week, because I think that's BS, honestly. And you ought to, if you want to have like a good way of thinking and doing and being efficient at work, you can see my guitars back there. I do stuff like that. And, that's a good antidote. And I think about things during those times. And I try to be efficient at work, which of course gets harder as the more senior you get, because you got people asking you to do some interesting things like this, but then a lot of other things that are not that interesting you got to show up to. But it's like, be efficient. Sit down, work, focus, knock stuff out, get that next line of code done, and then be done with it, and go do your fun things, hang out with your family, because those things all kind of like are a healthy way of approaching it that I think you should be taught from the beginning, rather than like have to wait until you're a full professor and decide that, oh, by the way, I have time to go fishing today. But you don't, but you just kind of beg out, you just cancel meetings and then just go.
With that, I just want to thank both Mark and Francesca for being our first guests here on the podcast. And I have been told to inform everybody to rate, review, and subscribe to both the channel here as well as the podcast as it is, as people listen back to the recording. Also, if you can follow us on Twitter at ArtOfSciencePod, that'd be great. And again, just a thank you to the Policy Studies Journal and the Center of Policy Design and Governance at Syracuse University for helping us put together this joint initiative. And with that, again, thank you to you both, and we'll see everybody next quarter.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you, Graham, for having us. Bye.